Hey there, my name is Julia Rogers. I'm a professional gap year counselor, and today I'm going to walk you through a short overview of what a gap year is, how to plan one, and what kinds of programs and opportunities might be available to you if you decide to take the leap and take a gap year. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen because there's so many amazing visuals that go along with taking gap time, and it would be a crime not to show them to you. So here we go. How to take a gap year in 2022. So if you're a senior right now in high school and you're thinking, maybe I want to take a gap year, guess what? You're in luck. This is the presentation that you want to be watching. And I'm going to try and pack in as much information as I can in a short amount of time. Okay, so to get started, let's talk about what even is a gap year. A gap year is not a defined set of opportunities or anything like that. It's more of a concept. So the idea of a gap year is that it is a structured period of personal growth aided by activities of enrichment. If that sounds a little broad, that's actually the point. You want a gap year to fit your life, to fit your interests, to fit your budget. So there's some benchmarks and some, common things that we see in gap time, but it is not just wilderness programs or not just traveling, or you don't have to go across the world. So some things I want you to be keeping in mind are that it is formative, meaning that it's a rite of passage. It's a great time to do it at a natural transition point in your life. So after you're graduating high school, if you need to take a break from college, after college, etc. It should be purposeful and intentional. A gap year is not the absence of a choice. It is an intentional choice. So if you or a friend graduate high school and you think, I'm just not going to go to college, that's not necessarily a gap year. That is something else. So you want to be making the intentional choice to take gap time. It's often experiential, meaning that it happens outside of the classroom. You're out in the world, you're experiencing life, you're experiencing new places, meeting new people, and it's super invigorating. And lastly, it's personalized. I always characterize a gap year as the most customizable form of education that you could ever hope for. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what that actually looks like in practice. But first, I wanted to tell you about some other things in the words of students themselves, because I've been working in the gap year space for about 13 years. I took a gap year myself. I've traveled all over the place, but my voice is never going to be as legit as hearing it from students. So this is just a few quotes that I pulled from a survey of students who took COVID gap years in 2019 into 2020, or sorry, 2020 into 2021. And this is some of their feedback when I asked them, what should I tell students who are considering taking a gap year? And as you can see, and this is something that I see across the board. I've worked with hundreds of gap year students. I've never heard somebody regret taking gap time. But if you're watching this video, you're probably still weighing the pros and cons, and that's okay. You should be thinking about your options. You should be thinking about if it's the right choice for you. But what I will say is that don't not take a gap year because you're afraid of it, or because it seems like an uncertain choice, or because none of your friends are doing it. Those are not reasons to not take a gap year. If it feels like the right choice for you, you should definitely make it happen and do it. All right. So this is also worth mentioning. Data is proof in the pudding, as they say. So here are some things that we find as outcomes of gap year students. First of all, we see that gap year students say that overwhelmingly 95% of survey respondents in a recent survey said that their gap year helped set them up well for their next step, whether that be college, vocational school, military, whatever that next step was, a gap year was a good thing that helped them prepare and be ready for it. Next, 98% of students say their gap year added to their maturity and confidence. Who doesn't want that? Especially, as you're graduating, some people feel a little bit uncertain about going straight to college. Some people feel like they're burnt out. Listen to yourself. If those are things that you'd identify with, then a gap year is a really good thing to consider. And lastly, a gap year for a lot of survey respondents increased their academic motivation. Some students are afraid of taking gap time because they feel like they'll lose their academic edge, or they won't be able to hack it once they get to college academically. But actually, we see the exact opposite. Students feel re-engaged with their learning. They've spent a year learning in different ways and spending time outside the classroom. So when they start college, they're actually much more ready for the experience, both mentally as well as just feeling really rejuvenated. Another thing that we find, and this is separate surveys from the data that I'm showing you right now, is that gap year students at Middlebury College and UNC Chapel Hill, when they did this study, actually performed better academically than traditional students. So gap year students do not fall behind academically or in any other way. They actually are a little bit of a leapfrog ahead of their peers. That's something that's definitely worth considering. So if you've already decided that you want to take a gap year and you're trying to figure out how to make it happen, well, I've got a little alliterative, tip for you. And that's this 3 words: dream, define, design. First of all, I would welcome you to commit to the concept, commit to taking a gap year. Say, I'm going to do it, be proud about it. It's a really cool thing to do. It's becoming more common, but even if it's not common in where you live or in your high school, know that you will find a tribe of other young people who are making this choice as well and doing some really interesting and cool things. So once you start planning your gap year, and maybe this is your first step in that journey, you're really wide open to the world, and that's the dream phase. This is a time for you to explore all these different options, talk to people who've done gap time, go to webinars, go to info sessions, start Googling, make a short list of locations that you really want to visit or places that you know people. So that's the dream phase. But things can get overwhelming in the dream phase. It's a fun place to be, but it can also seem like too many options. So this is the quickest way to get from the dream phase to the define stage. Do an exercise where you set goals for your gap time. I think that every good gap year contains goals from 3 different categories. Personal goals, meaning things that you just want to do for yourself, for fun, for your own learning and enrichment. Practical goals, meaning things that you want to do to increase your life skills and independence. And professional goals, things that you want to do to experiment with careers or possible majors that you could have in college. So come up with a couple goals in each of those subcategories. And then all of a sudden, the world of options isn't so overwhelming anymore, because you can start matching up your goals with the different opportunities that are out there. And then you start designing your gap time. You find programs, or you design your own itinerary based on those goals. And keeping in mind that most students do not just do one thing with their gap year. Most students do multiple things over the course of this 12 to 15-month period of time. And it can be different things in different places. And it can even be different budgets. Maybe you have a budget for your gap year and you spend a lot of it on one really great structured program. And then you work or do lower cost things for the other half of your gap time to help offset that. That is a really common way of putting together gap time, and definitely consider it if that would make sense for you. But what can you do on a gap year, you might be wondering. I always think that people who are researching gap years think that a gap year is whatever they know a gap year to be based on who they've talked to, if that makes sense. So if you've talked to somebody in your high school who took a gap year and they spent a month in Alaska on a wilderness expedition, or they traveled through Europe backpacking, or they went and volunteered at an elephant sanctuary in Thailand, you might think that that is what a gap year is. And so if you don't want to go work with elephants in Asia, you might not think a gap year is for you, but that's not the case, because there is an entire world of options out there waiting for you. And it's just about finding the right fit in the right order that matches with your personality and your needs and your budget and what you want to do. One of the things I always tell people when they're talking about gap time in kind of comparison to the college application process is that it is the exact opposite of the college application process. When you apply to college, you're asking an institution to accept you, to deem you worthy. A gap year is the exact opposite. A gap year is all about asking, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn? Who do you want to become? And how can this myriad of options support you in getting to where you want to be? So that's really what a gap year is all about. And all of these options are around there to support you. I won't go through each individual thing. You can always pause this slide and read through it. But I'm going to give you a couple examples of what these things look like in practice on the next slides. And I also want to just point out that there's a separation between programs and self-designed opportunities. Please play around with the idea of doing some structured and some independent or self-designed opportunities throughout your gap year. Programs are going to be usually things that you pay for or things that are structured by an organization that offer, support, mentorship, that offer, a purpose for you going and doing that. there's different lengths of time, different budgets, and different social structures contained within all of these programs. But a program means that you will go and show up and there will be stuff for you to do that you don't have to plan yourself. Self-designed opportunities can be more personalized, can be more independent, can be more of your own creativity, but they're going to require more effort on your part to design them and make them happen. So think, for example, if you want to travel in Europe, you can join a tour of Europe that is guided and brings you around to a bunch of different cities where you get to see all the sites and you're with a group of other gap year students. Or you could plan a 30-day trip of Europe where you're traveling on the Eurorail by yourself, staying at hostels, managing your budget, and doing all of that on your own. Now that might seem kind of intimidating to start your gap year with if you've never traveled much on your own. So if that's really a goal that you want to do, I want to travel Europe by myself or with a small group of friends, maybe put that towards the end of your gap year. So you can scaffold your year by starting with things that are more structured and working towards more independence. Because if you spend 3 months traveling with a group program somewhere, and then later in your year, you decide that you want to travel on your own, you're going to have all the tools and all the skills you need to do something like that. So keep that in mind, that there can be a progression as you move through your year. So another thing that's worth noting is where you can spend gap time. Some people assume that you have to spend a gap year abroad, and that's simply not the case. You can spend a gap year close to home or partially close to home for some of it. You can do virtual programs. You can spend your gap year in the United States for part or all of it, or you can go international. And as we see things moving in the right direction with the pandemic and the world kind of starting to open its borders again, as we move into 2022 and planning for gap years that start in that year, there's going to be more borders open and more travel that's available to you. So that's always good. Now, for experiential programs, when you Google gap year program, a lot of what's going to come up is these experiential programs, and they really have different themes. So it's worth knowing the model of this type of program. So experiential programs or semesters tend to be a fixed length of time, usually somewhere between 6 and 12 weeks long. And they have a group of peers that you're traveling or working alongside. So usually 12 to 15 other gap year students. So highly social, really great for making friends. And then the other thing is that you're going to be led by leaders who are usually in their late 20s, early 30s, who have the proper skill set to be teaching or leading whatever the program theme is around. So there's outdoor themed programs. So you might be going and backpacking and rappelling and rock climbing and whitewater rafting in the American West, or going to learn mountaineering in Patagonia, or hiking to Annapurna Base Camp in Nepal. All those things are available to you through outdoor programs. On the flip side of that, there's also arts and culture programs that really either allow you to learn studio art techniques and really tap into your creative side, and or learn a language and immerse yourself in a culture that is outside the States. And then a combination of these two things is service learning programs, where you kind of get a buffet of different opportunities. So one week you might be whitewater rafting in Costa Rica. The next week you might be volunteering with sea turtles. The next week you might be doing a indigenous arts workshop in the hillside of Guatemala. So lots of different opportunities there. So if you're the kind of person who wants to try a lot of different things, a service learning program could be a great fit for you. These programs are on the more expensive side, but many of them also offer college credit. So you can either pay for them with 529 funds if you have a 529 account, or you might just invest in this kind of program because it's the right fit for you. Water break. Okay, so then we've got service work and volunteering. A lot of people don't realize that the largest gap year program in the United States is AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is the domestic arm of the Peace Corps. And if you are a high school graduate or have your GED, you are eligible for many AmeriCorps programs, including City Year, Public Allies, and CCC. And all of these programs are, if you're 18 plus and have that qualification, you can apply. And these are usually 10-month-long programs that are fully funded. You get training, you get amazing life experience, and then you also get an education award at the end of your service that you can use towards higher education. So if you are looking to do a gap year on a budget and you want to stay in the States, definitely consider AmeriCorps options. There are also AmeriCorps options that are shorter in length or do things like working on trails in the national parks and other types of service like that. So keep an eye out for those kinds of national service opportunities as well. And then for programs and projects that are based both in the States and internationally, I like to break it down into two subcategories. We've got people-focused projects and community work, and then we've got in like conservation projects with sometimes with animals. So if you're really interested in teaching or working with people or doing elder care or community development or microfinance work, there are projects that can support all these different, interests and topics that you might want to give back and contribute to. Similarly, if you like to be outside, if you want to work on reforestation projects, if you want to do animal rehabilitation, if you can go work with horses in Mongolia, you can be like these students in the picture and work with orphaned baby monkeys in South Africa. You could even do underwater conservation work and do fish surveys and reef bleaching surveys in places like Belize and Costa Rica and the Bahamas while getting your PADI certification. So really the opportunities to give back locally or internationally and gain some skills are really wide and varied and really fun. A lot of times project-based NGO work with volunteer opportunities is more flexible in length. So keep an eye out for the timing on these projects. Sometimes they have various start dates in a month and a minimum required commitment, time commitment, but some of that varies. So keep an eye out for that. So then there's courses and internships, and this is really good if you have a skill that you want to learn, or if you want to kind of try out an interest in a real world environment to see if it might be something that you want to pursue as a career. A lot of this can happen virtually. There are virtual internships, virtual courses, and I know that a lot of people are really burned out on virtual school from this past year, but keep in mind that this would be all of your choosing. So maybe you want to take a virtual photography course to get boned up on your skills before you go traveling, something like that. So it's all your choice. Other times, sometimes you might want to get a requirement out of the way before you start college. So I've had students who've done a calc course or another type of course, college level, before they start college on their gap year. Then there's also all sorts of enrichment opportunities, especially in sports and arts, but in basically anything you could want to learn, there's a course for it that you could do on your gap year. So ski and snowboard improvement courses. You can do, you can get your scuba certification, you can do studio art, you can do photography, you can do acting. So many ways to just build on a hobby or a life skill that you want to use for the rest of your life. And then lastly, there's pre-professional certifications and internships. So if you think you want to go into real estate, you could do a real estate internship, maybe in the States or maybe abroad, because there are internship programs that you could actually get matched with a placement. Similarly, you can do a boat building course or a woodworking certification, or this picture is actually a fashion course in London. And all of those courses are going to give you skills, but they're also going to help you understand what an industry or what a skill set looks like in practice that you might want to pursue for serious. So all those things are an option for you as well. And then, there's the sky is the limit on what you can design yourself as well. So a lot of students will work or do work exchange for part of their gap time. Working is pretty straightforward, but you can also work away from home. A lot of people think of working as living with your parents and working a job locally, but you can also work away from home. And in some cases, hopefully soon, we'll be able to work abroad again. And gap year students can actually get working holiday visas in Australia or New Zealand. Hopefully those will start up again soon. If you don't have a work visa, you can also do something called work exchange, which is where you work in exchange for your room and board. And this is a really popular way to travel in Europe, in Latin America, in other places where it's hard for Americans to work in a traditional way. So you might go work at a bed and breakfast or work on an olive farm or work on a boat. And in exchange for 4 or 5 hours a day of work, you get free room and food. A good place to start with that is woofing, WWOOF, or Workaway. Now, innovation is also a big thing for gap year students. You might start your own business on your gap year. You might start your own nonprofit. You might start your own initiative. So many students are doing really cool political engagement and activism on their gap year. So if there's a cause, if you have an idea, if you have a spark within you, use your gap year to tease that out and bring it to life. And then lastly, there's all sorts of adventures that you can have. So, don't shy away from pursuing something that's of interest to you. The students in this picture, their Instagram handle is fishall50, and they spent their gap year last year going to every state in our country and fishing for the state fish, and they did it. And it's a really cool journey to follow and really an impressive feat as well. Similarly, I actually just saw on TikTok the other day that there was another student who did the same thing, except for it was eating Chipotle in each state. So slightly different vibe, but also equally impressive. So whether it's a road trip, whether it's traveling abroad, or some other independent pursuit, that's something that you can also do at some point during your gap year. So if you are college bound, the best thing that you can do to prepare for your gap year and have it be a seamless experience and great, like kind of baked into your college experience, is to apply as you would senior year. So we're in the fall right now. So if you can get your applications in while you have the support of your school counselor, while you're already in the mode of applying to colleges, do it. Because the best thing that you can do is get into school in the spring as a senior in high school and then request a deferral from your top school of choice. And so what that looks like is you, if your school is deferral friendly, you would get an admission, you would put down a deposit to accept your admission, and then you would request a deferral, which is basically writing a letter saying, this is what I want to do on my gap year, this is why I'm taking one, and this is why I think I'll be a better student because of my gap year. And then the school will receive that, they'll rubber stamp you, and then they will hold your spot for a year so you can take your gap year. And this is a really popular policy. Every school has a little bit of a different policy, different deadlines. So you want to make sure when you're applying to schools that you jot down different schools' deferral policies. You can always ask admissions and they will tell you what the policy is. So keep that in mind. If you are applying for financial aid, you do have to reapply for FAFSA during your gap year and you will get a new package. And with merit aid or in-house scholarships from your future college, you have to, sometimes it's case by case. Sometimes they will carry over with your offer of admission. Other times you might have to reapply. So a lot of the gap year and college stuff is case by case. So the more research you can do as it pertains to your particular situation, the better. Another thing to note is that a lot of times colleges are happy for you to take a gap year. In fact, they often encourage it, but they don't necessarily want you to get college credit on your gap year. So some of them will say, we're happy for you to take a gap year. Do not try to get college credit on your gap year because that changes your status as an incoming freshman. So keep an eye on that and any other things that your college would want you to do in order for you to take a gap year, and you'll be golden. A couple places for further resources on this are the Gap Year Association. gapyearassociation.org has a list of deferral policies if you're interested in reading through those. And also I have a sample deferral letter on my blog, which is enroutgapyear.com, and then you can go over to the blog page and you should be able to find it. So that's a couple things about the college process. So as I mentioned earlier in the call or earlier in the presentation, I am a gap year counselor. So if you feel excited about a gap year, but a little bit lost in the process, we should talk. I offer free brainstorming sessions called introductory meetings for every gap year student who is a senior and considering gap time or committed to taking a gap year and needs a little bit of extra support. From there, if people really want it, I also offer full year and half year consultations. But for starters, if you would like a free brainstorming session, go to my website, fill out the questionnaire, and I will get in touch to schedule that for you. Lastly, resource slide. Here are some places where I think you should go check out if you want to learn more about gap years. Firstly, Gap Year Radio, the podcast. It is myself and a co-host. We interview gap year alums and kind of elevate their stories so that you can get as much information about what's out there for gap year possibilities as possible. So you can find that on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and gapyearradiopodcast.com. I also recommend the Gap Year Association, which is gapyearassociation.org. In addition to those deferral policies, they also have program listings, a student planning guide, and oodles of other resources. The USA Gap Year Fairs are in-person and virtual fairs that happen in the winter time. So check out usagapyearfairs.com or .org, and you can check out the schedule for 2022. Service Year Alliance is a great resource for national service opportunities. So check that out, serviceyear.org. And lastly, you can find me on social media. I'm most active on Instagram at enroutegapyear. And you can email me any of your questions or comments at julia@enroutegapyear.com. And I'm physically based in Vermont in beautiful Stowe. So if you're ever in my neck of the woods, you can feel free to get in touch. All right, I'm going to stop my share and say a proper goodbye. So thank you for watching this quick overview. I hope it was helpful. Please get in touch if you have any questions or if I left anything out and you need any clarification. Otherwise, happy planning and definitely take a gap year.